Welcome, Aki Kumar.
Hello, Jason Ricci.
It's great to have you here, and thanks for taking this time to be here for my YouTube channel. And I know I'm not paying you for this and stuff. And
Wait, what? Let's talk about that first.
Well,
is this just gonna be like every other blues gig I do?
This is why you're here, man. My hope is that some of the people that watch this will go and buy your recordings. But what are the links to your website, and where do I buy your music? How do I get interested in you? Do you teach? How are the ways that you make money off of this, and how can my audience, if they dig what you're doing, go and get your stuff?
Okay, so first about the links and website. I have a website, akikumar.com, and a lot of my music is available there for download or purchase, CDs. Some of it I have taken down, but it'll be back up soon, and we can talk about that later.
Okay.
But primarily, I would direct people to get my music off of my website. Also, I'm a live performing artist, so I try to play as many gigs as I can every week, and I sell my merchandise at my shows. So if anybody that's in your listening audience is on the West Coast or in the Bay Area specifically, and they can come catch me at one of my shows, that's how I make my money for the most part, is playing all the time. I teach very sparingly, and it's only upon request, really. And one of the reasons is because there's great guys like you who are dedicated, students of the harmonica and blues, and also exceptional teachers who have already put so much amazing in-depth material out there. I don't feel like there is any need for me to rehash all of that stuff. So the only time I teach is when people, and this has happened recently, someone saw me do something in the middle of a solo and said, "Hey, what is that? Can I come hang out and figure out what you were doing?" Half the time I don't even know what I was doing, so it kind of helps me figure out what I was doing.
Yeah.
So that's when I teach.
Okay. And for your CDs and stuff, are they also available on like Amazon and iTunes and things like that?
Yes, some of them are, some of them aren't. Right now, I would just direct everybody to my website, and if they want a physical CD mailed to them, they can just write me, and I'll do it. I'll work out a PayPal or whatever, and get
Okay,
that
and
taken
they
care of.
just write you through akikumar.com. There's an email
Yeah.
link. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So now that we got all that stuff out of the way, like already, like listening to you talk, some things came up for me. Your primary teacher, and correct me if I'm wrong, was David Barrett.
Yes.
And so David is one of those teachers that has created a lot of content that, like, in many ways is so good and so complete that rehashing that stuff isn't really necessary, right? Like, just go to the source. Like, some of the reasons, like, people are like, "Jay, you should make more videos for your YouTube channel." Some of the other guys like Ronnie and Adam, they're really diligent. They put up stuff like once a week or once every couple of weeks and stuff. I don't do that for like the same reasons like that you said, like partially. I mean, some of it's I'm lazy and I'm touring and I'm teaching and I'm doing other things. But other reasons are like, I've seen their lessons and I'm like, man, I don't want to redo that because I don't want to say the same thing that they said. I'd rather just people watch that video, right? So what, coming from Dave, learning from Dave Barrett, like that already means a lot to me because I know Dave and I know like where he's at artistically. you know, and like his fundamental views of the instrument and like what's it good for and like what's it do well and stuff like that. Sort of the Joe Falisco, Dave Barrett kind of mindset of that this instrument particularly excels at playing blues music, that tongue blocking is an essential part of the approach to playing blues music. And this is how you do it. And if you choose to not do it this way, you might be the exception to the rule and be okay. But generally speaking, you should probably approach it that way. Is that how you came up?
Yeah, but I mean, to be entirely honest, I was very immensely clueless when I started taking lessons with Dave. With regards to blues, you know, I mean, I had started listening to some of it, and I had started kind of playing some harmonica, trying to do these bends. Really, it was awful. And so Dave kind of got everything started for me in terms of introducing me to a lot of great music, introducing me to technique, introducing me to the discipline of practice, you know, and setting some ambitious technical standards, progressing through songs. All of that, he kind of nurtured that in the first couple of years of me going. Because honestly, I wasn't that serious about it. I was still this guy and trying to, you know, keep his American visa and you know, keep his job. And I came from a background in India where academics was the only way out of you know, to get out of the rut, if you want to call it that. So for me, having this academically kind of inclined instructor was perfect, because he was just going dot 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 dot. This is how I approach it, and this is how it would be helpful if you looked at it. And for me, it was perfect. I didn't have to flail too much. I didn't pick up any bad habits. I also picked up good listening habits, because one of the things Dave always emphasized was to listen. And I would watch him listen. Sometimes if I would take a song to him that was new, and he's really quick at transcribing new material, you know, in his notation, and watching him just go loop a song over and over and over, like almost in a robotic, you know, manner. But that's the kind of discipline he had built up for himself to become really good. So I watched all of that. It wasn't just one thing or the other. And since you brought up tongue blocking, I'll say that that was the greatest thing to witness with Dave. Was when I first started taking lessons with him. This was way back. It's like 2004, if I remember correctly. He was not tongue blocking then. He had just started to change into tongue blocking, and he made the conscious effort to start tongue blocking while he was teaching me. So for about 6 months, I watched him struggle.
Yeah.
And he ultimately obviously figured it all out, and you know, in true Barrett style, he was playing just as good as he was puckered, but tongue blocked later on. But I watched him do it, and so I was like, okay, so if this guy is doing it, I got no excuse right now. And he also showed me something really cool, is that his pucker tone was just as good as his tongue block tone. So despite the fact that he was tongue blocking, he could just as easily have been puckering. He just gave himself a technical edge by tongue blocking on you know, like if you're playing Big Walter and all that. But it's not like it was the end of the road for him, the fact that he wasn't tongue blocking. So although I tongue block almost pretty much everything now, I always keep that in the back of my mind, that this is not really something that one technique is going to make or break.
Yeah. Wow, that was so cool. Like, if nothing else comes out of this interview, just that recount of Dave learning to tongue block while teaching you, that's so great. I do that with my students. Like, one of the ways that I keep myself fresh when I'm running like a pentatonic scale or something for the first time is I just tongue block it. Like, and I don't even tell them that I'm doing it. I don't tell them that they need to do it either, right? If we're not working on that. But I just do that to do that. And that makes me feel really good about like the direction that I'm moving in. But like, it's so interesting because it brings up this other element of that it's not just about tone, that there's all kinds of textures and timbres and different elements of the tone that don't necessarily have to do with big, the adjective big, there's like a certain way that a 3-draw sounds when it's tongue blocked that has nothing to do with the slap attack or the release. It's just, there's like, and sometimes it's almost even a thinner sound than it is lip pursed or can be, but it has a textural thing to it that's very like hard to like tangibly put my finger on and say like, oh, this is like why you should do it or not. But you just kind of got to fall in love with it, right?
Yes, you do. You kind of have to fall in love with all of the aspects of the sound that you listen to. And I am, as I grow older and I play more, I am very much rejecting the notion of one size or one thing is the right thing, or one solution is the right solution, or one sound is the ordained holy sound. And the reason is simple, because when I listen to all of the guys that I like, and you included, I'm listening to such an array, a sonic array, and it covers so much, so many frequencies, so many types of tonalities, that it's almost ridiculous to get tied into one kind of school of thinking.
Yeah.
And I know we're not supposed to be harmonica centric, but you just mentioned something about the three draw, the tonality. One of the things I did when I was starting to play was I was trying to rip off this William Clark song called "Blowing the Family Jewels," and at that point I was puckering hole number one, and I wasn't happy with the way that one hole sounded in the entire song when I was playing it, because it would sound okay for all of the holes I was playing except the whole draw one. It sounded thinner. So just for that one hole, I changed my technique for that song, and I've kept it like that now moving forward to where I switch my tongue. It was very specific and conscious just to get that one tone. I wanted to be fat when I was playing amplified. But then I listened to Rice Miller, and he plays some songs, and he'll hit one draw in this shrill, tinny. That's not fat tone. He's just kind of drawing this really almost a high-pitched sound out of the lowest pitched tone. And he's not doing that for any other reason than he wants to get that sound. It's good for him, whatever. Yeah. And so when I do something in that style, I try to keep it actually light and not so fat. So really, context is everything.
Yeah, like today is Paul DeLay's birthday. I mean, it's also Charlie Musselwhite's, but like I noticed DeLay would do a lot of these things where like he used the sound of all of the different sounds of the harmonica in ways that would create like humor or would be funny or like or big and dark and deep. And it wasn't uncommon for DeLay to hit a note and hit that kind of that high frequency, like you said, the thinnest possible tone on the lowest possible note, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's all in context. And even though like we're not going to keep the interview like all harmonica centric, this is really beautiful because we're not really just talking about harmonica now. We're talking about an approach to music. And we may be talking about that through harmonica, but we're discussing like, how long do you spend under the influence of a tradition before you start saying, well, I'm impressed with the sonic array of possibilities that I hear you and everybody doing. Right, that's great. But like at the same time, like there's an argument that came up on Facebook the other day. I don't know if you saw it or not, but somebody said something like, how good is the internet for learning harmonica? Like, is it actually better before the internet? And, that question made me think because, I spent a long time on a single technique before moving on to something else because there wasn't the information out there for me to observe the sonic array of different tones. So I actually got good at doing one thing before I moved on to the next. And even though you're an open-minded cat and you have a lot of different things that, I mean, there's the reason you're here is, Aki Goes to Bollywood. That album alone, like, changed my whole view of you. Like, when you played me that record in the car that time, I was like, wow, I'm sitting next to an artist who has their own ideas about music, who wants to be himself, right? But before you did Aki Goes to Bollywood, you made sure that you were good at playing some straight ass shit the way it was supposed to be played, as accurately as you could, right? How important do you think it is to believe that traditional music is maybe the only way for a little while? Like, did you have a part of your development where you thought, I'm never going to not, I'm only going to play traditional blues? Was there ever, did you know Aki Goes to Bollywood was coming? Did you know that? Did you know that lip pursing would at someday be something that you'd be interested in doing? Or were you just dead set 100% in the belief pattern that this is the only way to do it?
Wow, that's a lot of big questions.
You know what I mean, though? Are you
Yeah,
following?
yeah, yeah. No, there's a lot to respond with, but um, traditional music, to me, I come from a culture in India. Everything is traditional, just about everything: language, music, food, dance, um, whatever. It is a traditional culture. So I kind of grew up with some level of just innate respect for traditional forms, even though maybe I didn't like them wholeheartedly, or maybe they didn't appeal to me, or some that I did like, but I felt, oh my God, it's going to take 50 years of commitment to learn this, and that kind of thing. But deep down inside, I knew, okay, this is traditional, which means it's not frivolous. It didn't just appear in a vacuum. There is a human history behind this art form, and it has been propagated and handed down for generations, and it must not be taken lightly. So this kind of thinking was already in me. With the blues, it's a very heavy tradition in many aspects. The music itself is obviously so wickedly amazing and so appealing and so deep. But the history behind it and the specific American context of the history behind it, the racial aspect of it, it's also heavy. So I never felt like I was going to take blues lightly, because I'm an outsider into this culture, both in an American sense and also blues sense. I'm no black guy from Mississippi who was trying to escape the plantation. None of that. So
Yeah.
I had to tread carefully approaching this genre, which I respected very deeply, and that kind of helped me spend the time that you're describing trying to get good at what I was doing, because I respect it and I don't want to take it lightly. And I sometimes I get irritated when I hear people dismiss it lightly. They'll go, "Oh, that's just three chords," and that kind of thing. It
Right.
kind of gets me gets me a little angry sometimes.
Yeah.
Also, I'm a slow learner, like from muscle memory to just retaining things. So I kind of had to take my time. It's not like I had this luxury of just, someone's telling me something and I'm doing it. I'm not that kind of guy. I also had obviously a day job for many years while I was trying to learn this stuff. So I had a whole different life, and I was barely squeezing in like half an hour to 45 minutes a day learning things. So I took my own sweet time, thinking this is just a lifelong journey for me, and I'm going to pursue this as best as I could. But then in my mid 30s, things changed, and now I'm playing a lot more, and I'm starting to fancy this whole professional aspect of a career. And a lot of things were also changing for me. And you have been one of the biggest influences in that department for me, because you might remember, or maybe you don't, but I used to stalk you when you'd play these gigs at JJ's where they were
Yeah.
kind of,
I remember
you
very
know yeah. So I was always I was watching all the traditional guys, obviously the guys that you and I both love, Kim and Rick and Hummel and all these guys who have been around the scene and just representing that big harmonica tradition in a fantastic way. But I was also keeping an eye on you because I was going, here's a guy who knows what all this is. I've listened to your old record where you're playing like, straight up like William Clark West Coast stuff, You wouldn't be able to tell that it was you, quite honestly, if you listen to it now.
Yeah.
And I'm going, okay, so this guy went through all of that, and somehow he has still forged an identity, both a persona on stage, off stage, musically, non-musically, where it is completely unique, but more importantly, it's not contrived. Nobody that watches you or talks to you, sees you perform, will ever, I don't think, ever walk away thinking this is bullshit. This guy is,
Thanks.
he's a scam artist or whatever. He's selling something that's not real. That's not what one gets watching you. So for me, in the back of my head, as I grew older, I was like, that is really, for me as an artist, my ultimate calling. Can I do that? Can I get there? I don't know if I will or if I have, but I have started the process. And so the Aki Goes to Bollywood thing was an honest conversation with me going, okay, great that you're learning all these little Walter songs. I love Rice Miller. I can do this my whole life pursuing this, but it's only going to capture and reflect a small part of who I am and who I want to be. And it also rejects this entirety of my Indian upbringing, which is very real. And in these, times, these very strange times, I feel like asserting that is also important for me. So how can I do that? That was one of the core reasons to bring that music out. I was singing those songs at home, trying to shield my blues audience from those songs, and I said, why? Why do that? If this audience doesn't like this aspect of me, perhaps they're not my audience. And that kind of thinking got me to do that project.
Wow. That was such an eloquent and articulate response to that really long question that I posed, and I couldn't have asked for a better answer. It was very flattering to hear you observe my music and what I'm doing in a way that made me feel validated, and that the degree to which I was playing William Clark like William Clark, now that I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, there's always room for improvement, right? One of the things that I struggle with musically, is that there's always so much more we can do to get better at something. Like you said so well, I could spend the rest of my life doing Rice Miller and not really get there. But that only expresses a small part of who I am, right? That influence. And at some point, when we look back at traditional music, there is a place where, we have to kind of think, like, what mindset was Little Walter in, right? Like, here's a guy that, like, okay, yes, we look at Little Walter as a traditional or harmonica player, a traditional artist. However, is it possible that, like, sort of Little Walter was maybe kind of looked at the way we look at, like, somebody like Sugar Blue, right? Or Howard Levy or something in that day, right? Like, what?
Or you?
I don't know about that, but okay, like, when we listen to early recordings of Little Walter, we can certainly hear John Lee Williamson. We can certainly hear Sonny Boy 1.
Yes.
And some Sonny Boy 2, especially rhythmically, but then as he evolves, like, and we listen to a song like Blue Midnight or Off the Wall or something like that, like there's like almost like no identifiable elements of a previous influence in that. It's really 100% Little Walter. So at some point there's, I don't want to call it an arrogance, but what I would rather refer to it as, sort of like you did, is like there's a need for Little Walter to personally, and I'm speculating because I didn't know him, but there's a need for him to say, look, these are the influences that I came up listening to. I dig Lester Young, I dig jazz, I dig drum beats. that are not definitive on the 2 and the 4 downbeats. You know what I mean? I dig open spaces and
Right.
sonic, possibilities. And I have to incorporate this into my music if I want to be true to myself, the same way that John Lee Williamson was being true to himself when he was not imitating Jazz Gilliam or somebody prior, right? So this idea of tradition, it's kind of abstract in a way, because what we observe as tradition in its day was not tradition. It was some kind of, it may be groundbreaking, it may not be, it may be just personal to the artist of, something that they did. Like, I don't look at myself as a groundbreaking harmonica player. I've made some ideas that were groundbreaking, like overblows, like Howard Levy's ideas. I've made some of those ideas maybe a little bit more accessible to blues people, but I don't see myself as like, I didn't really change anything on the landscape of blues. I just said, okay, cool. Like, look, you can get minor thirds and flat fives like up here too, right? And like they
yeah, but that's not entirely accurate. If I can interrupt very quickly, I think you're kind of downplaying what you've done. I
don't.
Really, the best way to I think gauge whether someone has changed the landscape is to look at how many clones they have created. And I've seen a lot of people like you, and that is a testament itself. And the second way to gauge whether somebody that has changed the landscape has done it well is to watch all the clones fail, which I've seen every single one of them do. So on those 2 aspects alone, I think you have changed a lot of things in the last 20 years.
Oh, well, thanks, man. But I give a lot of where I came from, my teachers too, Pat Ramsey and other guys and stuff. But I'm never at a place where I don't look for the value that still exists from people like Joe Falisco, from people like Dave Barrett. When those people speak, I listen very, very carefully. And the older I get, the more I stop being amused with the ideas that I might come up with and start returning to the basic fundamental principles of the instrument and what it did well before me, and going, wow, like, how can I revisit this stuff in a way that's going to benefit me, that's going to make me feel good about my instrument, and like, what did I miss? There's so much stuff. And I'm tremendously influenced by jazz music. I love jazz music, but how much of what I play is jazzy? Not really. It's not really that jazzy. But what I dig about jazz is like, it incorporates a lot of elements of music that I find fascinating, right? Like, I think I hear humor, and I hear soul, and I hear anger, I hear virtuosity, and somebody that's really studied their instrument. And then I hear it, a high advanced element of improvisation, right? Where people have to think on their feet and that kind of stuff. And all of those elements really intrigue me. So like, I feel like in spirit, I dig jazz, but do I really want to play it? Like, not really, because like, I still feel like I have so much to learn in a small element. Like, I still can explore the pentatonic scale, or man, I still can't play juke right. Like those kind of things still occur to me. So like, I've created kind of a limit of like, what is it that like I'm going to do and how am I going to get better at it? Which kind of brings me to my next question. Okay. So you mentioned, being heavily influenced by traditional Indian music, having this background in tradition, and then having this respect of coming into American music, American Black music specifically, and having a reverence and respect and caution in approaching this stuff. I think that's so important. And like, even though I'm not from another country, being from Maine is pretty close to being from another country. When I moved from Maine to Mississippi, the cultural difference, that I experienced living with Junior Kimbrough and R.L. Burnside and David Kimbrough. I lived with David, 100% of the time for like a little over a year. And it was huge. Like I realized right away, this music is in their culture, it's in their food, it's in their church, it's in their language. I heard people use the term fattening frogs for snakes in conversation.
Spectacular, right.
Yeah. And that's when I realized that I'm only a tourist here. Okay. That, I can say I'm from Maine. That's technically the United States. I can say that there are blues players that came and toured and stuff in Maine or whatever, but it's not my music. It's not my culture. So like, but at a certain point, you have to say, okay, I get it, and that's cool, but I gotta be me the same way Lil Walter had to be him. And you did that. You did that. And, okay, so just for a little history quickly, and I could be like way off base here. I should have done more homework, but
Make something up.
What?
Make something up, please.
It Takes Three, the album. Was that your first release as like a accomplished harmonica player?
No, I don't have a release as an accomplished harmonica player, but it was my second album that came out. I had an album before that was really my first and very loud attempt at saying, look, I love blues, I love traditional blues, and I love different styles of it. And it was called Don't Hold Back. That came out the year before David, the It Takes Three album.
Okay, can my subscribers buy that record, Don't Hold Back?
Yeah, they can. They can buy it off of my website, and I would really be happy if they did because I'm very proud of it.
Awesome. And how about It Takes Three? Is that available for purchase on your website too?
Yes, that is available on my website. It's also available on David Barrett's website, and I think CD Baby, Amazon, all of that.
Great. The It Takes Three was the first record I heard. I didn't hear Don't Hold Back. That where I was like, holy cats, Aki's like really getting good. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you held your own with two of the best harmonica players in California, and California is full of great harmonica players, especially blues guys. It was a great outing. But when I heard Aki Goes to Bollywood, everything changed for me. I have the poster on my wall signed by you, and I was never more certain that there was another artist out there that was like so sincere, right? Like that record like blew my mind, like how you were able to be you and still have all of the like tangible fundamental elements of the traditional blues and unapologetically say, this is me, this is my culture, this is my personality. Like,
yeah.
To come from like being a software engineer, is that the right title?
Yeah.
Okay, from like being that in a guy who was a hobbyist studying traditional blues to arrive at a record that was so well done, that was so like realized like right away, like I mean, in my own journey, like I don't feel like there was ever a leap like that. Like it was so gradual, but like this record came out and it was like it was the only record that had an effect on me as strongly as like when Sean Costello released Moaning for Molasses. I remember going like Sean was a great traditional guitar player, like really good. And Moaning for Molasses is mostly a traditional record. There's a lot of Buddy Guy covers and stuff like that. Like, but there's like Otis Rush stuff. But like, holy shit, like this kid just fucking figured out something, man. You know what I mean? Right. Like, and he's doing it. And like,
right.
I'm blown away, and I'm gonna pay attention to everything that he does from here on out. That's how I felt listening to Aki Goes to Bollywood. Can you explain like what happened that you know, and you've alluded to it already a little bit, you know that you had some ideas about your own culture and that and you really said, well, you said like maybe this isn't my audience if they don't like it, right? Like you're willing to take a leap of faith and stuff like that. But can you explain the emotional and musical and intellectual process that went into the decision to make that record, the actual recording of it, and the release?
From an I already touched upon it a little bit, and you kind of mentioned this very cool point about going from Maine to Mississippi and having this outsider sense about your entry into blues. I've had this outsider feeling since day one in many ways, not just in the musical sense, but coming to the United States. I think immigrants, first generation immigrants, will always carry this. I think first generation immigrants specifically from non-European countries carry it a little more than in the US than their peers from European countries. It's just the nature of it. So with blues, there was another level of outsiderness for me in that I'm always aware that it's not really my music and I'm trying to, do this. One of the things that I started to become aware of in my 30s was that there's, for whatever reason it might be, and we can talk about this endlessly, probably better off the record, but there's a huge instinct amongst the blues audience and the blues musician base to brand what is real blues and what is not real blues. Yeah. This is real, that's real. This guy's real, that guy's not real. And the older I've become, the more I've realized that it's a joke, because I see a lot of my peers and contemporaries, even the American ones, and I look at them and I go, well, you're no more real than me, and I'm no more real than you. Again, this ties to the tradition of this art form. And so once that kind of thinking came about in my fledgling musical mind, I was like, okay, so I don't feel like I fully fit into this community, even though I'm every day committed to playing all of the traditional stuff. And even today I woke up and I was trying to listen to Lonesome Sundown and kind of nail this one vocal thing. The first thing I did in the morning, trying to listen to traditional blues and do that, right? Even though that's where I'm almost always at musically, I don't feel like I belong in this community in a wholehearted sense. Politically, and I don't want to dwell on this too much because we reach out to a large audience. Around 2014, 2015, 2016, with the Trump phenomena, I started to realize a lot of the people in my vicinity, in my orbit, that I thought were peers or that I thought were sympathizers or just generally people who understood, didn't really understand. They didn't understand deep aspects of this music. They were in deep denial about American cultural heritage. They were deep denial about world history.
Yeah.
And so I realized there's another level of detachment here that I'm starting to get to. And musically, I realized that a lot of the Bollywood songs that I decided to pick and cover in that first album, especially, India's history in Bollywood, and I'm learning about this myself as I go, is steeped in Indian musical composers, especially for Bollywood, which is the pop side of the movie industry, which is pop music, really. They were always listening to American music all the time. They were listening to Western music because that was hip. That was what was setting the standard in contemporary music. So they were always deriving from American music. And so I realized a lot of these old songs that I like from the 50s and 60s in India, I like them because they already kind of have a lot of the stuff I like about blues and swing and jazz. So why not make this honest effort to re-render some of them in a way that I feel is an honest way, where I'm not completely, someone listening to it doesn't feel like, oh, this is just contrived. I'm using that word again, but I was very afraid of that. I didn't want it to be fake. So I picked specifically songs that were really dear to me, that I sing all the time just because I grew up listening to them, and they're very close to who I am musically, and lyrically also I picked songs that I love, and I decided to do all of that all at once. It kind of just happened, um, and I can't say it's one thing or the other. The other thing that happened just from a career standpoint is when I mentioned all of this to a gentleman named Jim Pugh, who's a super accomplished keyboard player. He had just kicked off this nonprofit organization called Little Village, where he was scouting for artists who had something new or newish or some new direction, but who hadn't kind of had the backing to do it. And when I pitched this idea to him, this is a guy who's played 40, 50 years in the blues and R&B scene. Played with Etta James for many years, was in Robert Cray's band. He's been around this blues scene. I pitched the idea to him, and he just jumped up and said, "Let's do it." That was a good sign for me that somebody outside of me, that wasn't me, really thought it was a good idea.
Yeah.
And then, what's that?
Thank goodness for that.
Yeah. No, that was really good. And then Ken Anderson, who was really musically played such a prominent role in that first album. He was also sold on the concept. These guys were happy to participate, so I didn't feel any hesitation in doing it as a result. And so I said, let's just do it.
And Kid produced that record, right? Kid Anderson produced the record, and he also played some Indian instruments on the record too. Like
he played sitar. He retuned it so he could play it like Muddy on a couple of songs, and it really worked out really well.
It was cool. That was some of my favorite parts of that record, were those kind of things. That was a really great answer. I was particularly moved by one thing that you said that I know you kind of wanted to shy away from, and we don't have to get into it, but I just want to reiterate for my listeners, when you said that you had thought that the audience was of a certain mindset, understood the culture of the music, the angst and the need, like the source of the inspiration of some of the subject matter of blues music, American history and world history, you suddenly realized during the current administration's occupation that those guys didn't get it, right? Like I found that like also true, like but I didn't have to wait until Trump like to discover that. I remember getting in bands, being in vans, driving around the country with like all white blues bands and hearing racial slurs in the van, and we were playing black music, and I couldn't understand it. It's a complex issue. There is some things that happen in the South that don't happen in the North, and those things that happen, the use of racial slurs does not mean that racial prejudice doesn't exist to the same extent in the northern states. Okay. Right. But there's a certain blatancy and ability in the South, where I've spent most of my life growing up in Maine. I grew up there, but I left home when I was pretty young. And after a short period of time in the Northwest going to college, I found myself in Memphis in 1995. And I've gradually migrated more and more south, ever since then, until I ran out of land, here I am, right, in New Orleans. But like, that was a tough pill for me to swallow. Another one that you bring up that I found really particularly true for me was you mentioned a certain amount of comfort that you received by doing your own music. I remember like when I first moved to Mississippi and started playing with David Kimbrough, I would go months at a time without seeing another white person. And there were I spent most of the time that I lived with David, the first 7 or 8 months or more, like really trying to pretend that I was part of the culture. I would pick outfits that I would shop at the same clothing stores that those guys, I would wear the same shoes. I would do the best to make my hair as like a pompadour or something like that fit in with the tradition of blues music. I would try to use the same language that those guys were using, the same terminology, adjectives, descriptions. I would pretend that I liked certain foods that weren't really appealing to me, or at least I would try them, not just out of respect for the culture, but like a need to fit in. And you know what I mean? Yeah. And, and that didn't work out for me very good down there. Like, people like tolerated me, but nobody got close to me. Okay. I didn't have very many valuable relationships where there were communication on subjects that were difficult, or interesting, or enlightening. I didn't have any of those things, those conversations, until I kind of dropped the act, until I started like realizing that I couldn't put it on full time and that people liked me better when I was just me, right? Like I actually stood less of a chance of getting my ass whooped if I just fucking acted like I was from Maine and I was a white kid and like tried to explain to them, I don't understand what you just said. Like, I don't get it. Like, instead of just shaking my head like, oh yeah, man, I feel you, bro. You know what I mean? Instead of like, saying something like that, I would be like, man, I don't get it. Like, what'd you just say? Like, what, you're fitting to do something? Like, just 2 months ago, I learned it was fixing. Now, all of a sudden, you're fitting to do something, right? Is there a difference? Bobby Rush, like, I ain't stutting it, right? I didn't understand. I didn't understand what that song was. I didn't understand what it meant. It took me a while, and I couldn't understand it until I was willing to admit that I didn't. Okay. So once I kind of dropped the bullshit, and it took some things like, I had to get thrown into a space heater and through a wall and had to get my ass whooped a couple of times over basically some cultural differences, that like before I figured out like all that what was happening to me, in that environment, I was being taken in as an outsider and being treated like an equal. And all this was happening to me from a culture that was used to people that look like me in situations of power and oppression. And yet I was being fed and housed and brought into the most sacred of environments, the church and the music and the juke joints, and allowed to like kind of participate on some level, right? That was super cool, but it took me a long time to realize, like, I don't think I fully realized it even while I was there, like how like heavy that was. So like, when David Kimbrough borrowed my car and left for 2 days, I was pissed. And maybe rightfully so, maybe not, man. Like, what had I been given? A house, free rent, a job, food. I was having sex with, people related to the Kimbroughs, like everything, man, and here I am, I'm upset because, he took advantage of my vehicle for a couple of days, right? So I still have this idea of like, this is mine and this is yours, and not this idea of we're family and we treat this like family, right? So there's a separation, that was profound, and it was profoundly put in that. So when you made Aki Goes to Bollywood, what were the, aside from my like obvious like admiration and appreciation of the record, right? What was the response from everybody else?
Mostly positive. mostly positive. But then that also falls in the bracket of a lot of people will tell you the positive stuff for the most part. Uh, I think there was a fair amount of what is this kind of sentiment as well. Uh, a little bit of confusion about what that was. Um, I know for a fact there was some amount of rejection of the whole thing for various reasons. This is not real blues, like we just talked. This is not real blues, um, or oh, he's only doing this because he'll never cut it as a blues guy. That kind of thing.
Wow.
There's a little bit of that. But the thing for me is, and I'll say this again, overwhelmingly, what I heard, what people came up to me and said when they did say anything, it was positive. And a lot of people, especially folks, Americans born and raised here, they seemed so joyful when they were talking about it. It was almost like there was like a release of some sort that they experienced from listening to it, which made my day, right? Because I was like, wow, it's caused this profound change in someone's life by not even, I'm not even trying to. I wasn't even thinking about it. So all of that positivity just drove me to do another one, because I was like, if this worked, then I know I can do better with the next one. I think I did, and especially because I kind of went a little more out there. I was definitely more prepared with the next one as far as what I had musically in mind. I wrote some songs, original ones, with the idea that that's going to be the direction for me moving forward. So, obviously, if the response hadn't been good, or if I'd felt that the product was weak, I wouldn't be going in this direction. But this is now my direction in many ways. And I'll repeat again, without stopping in any way my love for traditional blues or my pursuit of it. I still play pretty much 80% of that in all of that. Even when I'm playing Bollywood songs, my solos are stolen from Junior Wells. So that's just, in some way it's kind of fulfilling. In some way I'm kind of sticking it to people who go, you can't really do this and that. No, you can, and look, it works. Look, I just got back from India. Very few of them actually probably have a lot of exposure to traditional blues. I played in 3 different cities. They didn't care, man. They didn't care what solo I was playing. They were relating to the song. Even when I was doing original songs, they were relating to the energy or whatever. That's really, it comes down to what I said about you. I am starting to believe that as long as an artist is being honest and committed to what they're doing, I think people will relate to it. Now, if it happens to be blues or jazz or punk or whatever, that's the medium. That's the medium. If it's harmonica, great. If it's not, that's great. But who are you is what people relate to more than anything.
Today I was teaching a lesson, and we were going over the song "Right to Trust My Baby" by Sonny Boy Williamson, and I put on the Kim Wilson version afterwards, and man, it's so good, right? It's it's so close to the original. There's for me, there's nothing lost there. And there's not too many artists that I feel that can do that. Kim was one. Nick Curran is the other one that kind of comes they're just able to do it as good as the original people and not lose any of that flavor. But you said, you said, some people reacted to my record like, oh, he's doing this because he can't do the original music as good. Well, guess what, bro? I got news for you, man. I'm doing partly what I do because I can't, man. I can't do it that good. I can't play Right to Trust My Baby and sing it and hire the band and know the recording methods. Right. I just can't. I can't, right? I do what I do because that's what I do, I've done my best to learn as close to Sonny Boy as I can, but like vocally, I just don't have the vibrato and like, or I haven't done enough work on it or whatever it is. But like, or like I got distracted because, bro, I dig Ramones. You know what I mean? Like I dig the Pixies, right?
Right.
Like, like
Other music.
yeah.
Yeah.
When I'm in the bathtub, it's Charlie Parker or Joe Henderson. You know what I mean? That's what I want to hear. Like, but like so like I'm distracted, but also there's this very real thing of, man, like I can't do it like that. I could never make the album Tiger Man. Like that
Right.
album, when I listen to those songs, like man, I'm not gonna lie, like there's some songs on that record I've gone back and heard the original, and I like Kim's better. Like I think Kim does it.
It's
Yeah,
an album. It really is.
like how
Um,
the yeah, how the heck did he do
well,
it?
Well, so Kim is one of those guys, and I look at some people like that. I mean, Nick, you nailed it with Nick. He's one of those guys. There's some people that are like, I think, just genetic mutants. Kid, when you listen to him, I saw a kid do something. There was I won't mention any names, but there was like a guitar challenge going on, and it was a BB King song, and everybody was doing their damn best to play BB King. Kid Anderson shows up, plays that stuff, and I dare you to find somebody who could play that kind of style with that soul, that sensibility closer. And it was just like, wow, what the hell did he just pull off?
Yeah.
Some guys are mutants, and there's no debating or disputing or challenging how close they get. But for me, although I would have been, and I still am in love with that aspect of it. The good thing about being almost 40 versus being 25 for me is, now that I know the difference, and I know the one simple truth, that that does not define realness in blues. And it never did. Uh, First, for me, a lot of the artists, let's take Trust My Baby with Rice Miller. Please show me who, other than Rice Miller before him, played that song like that. Okay, so Little Walter, same thing. You made that point really well. Jazz Gilm, another original. All the guys that I like, all of them, not one guy. There's no exceptions to this. All the blues artists that I like are original voices.
Mm-hmm.
All right. None
Mm-hmm.
of them would have respected each other if they were trying to mimic each other in some kind of way.
Yeah.
They were probably inspired, deriving, and they were competing and cutting each other musically. Of course, it was
Yeah.
very competitive. They were not trying to be clones. So that aspect, being real blues, to me is now, I'm thoroughly rejecting it in my own head, because I have to do that in order to progress, just at a human level. So I've come to terms with that aspect. Now, as far as singing, like you were saying, oh, can I get that vibrato and all? Man, I don't have no singer's voice. I can hold a tune, mostly come 85% accurate to the pitches, but I'm not singing like Bobby Blue Bland, and I never will. This is a muscular defect. I am happy to be, come to terms with this. But when I hear you do Broken Toy, and you're just screaming this angst-ridden story out, please find me somebody that'll listen to that and go, well, yeah, but it's not quite that vibrato. It's not quite. Nobody in their right mind would care about that silly technical aspect, because what you're delivering is more real than any of these technical things. And so, technical facility to me, and I say this in front of you, one of the most technically proficient monster players, technical proficiency to me is no longer a metric for realness in blues.
No, no. I think my favorite harmonica player is Taj Mahal.
Right. Yes.
I think, like, and why do I say, like, my favorite? Like, the guy I listen to that, like, makes me, like, think that harmonica is fun. You know what I mean? Or like when I listen to it and I'm like, how did he, like, why did he end there? Like how did the phrase do that? Like
Right.
it's similar for me when I listen to, like, Thelonious Monk, for example, right? Like, some of the phrasing is just so disjointed and awkward. Or on his birthday, Paul DeLay, right? Like when I listen to my favorite harmonica solo of all time, My favorite is Silly Smile off of the album. Well, I think it's off of another record originally, but I first heard it on a record called Take It From the Turnaround, which was a double record. Yeah. And I can't remember if it's Paul Zilla or the other one, because I think those two records were put together in one from the record company. But like that solo to me was like so much fun and so exciting and so full of leaps and jumps and surprises and like all this like emotion that like technically it just so didn't matter if it was good or not, like, or if it followed any rules or any of that stuff. Like, I mean, I'm pretty sure that Rice Miller's playing major over minor on the song Help Me.
Yeah.
And it works. And that's a rule in music that I don't break. And like, I've heard Rod Piazza's guitar player and Nick Moss and Kid Anderson and other people, Charles Brown on piano, break these same rules. And they sound unbelievable. That is like the element of blues that is so intangible that it's still this giant mystery to me that like all the acid in the world is not going to help me figure out how to do it. You know, like all the study in the world, like there's just some kind of point where you just abandon it. But like, you know, like your points of like Broken Toy or whatever. Yeah, like I feel that way when I listen to Lou Reed. You know, he's not a great singer. He's a great lyricist, but the vocals to me, like, it's not going to be any better if like Rufus Wainwright or somebody who can really, really, really sing. Like, it's not going to be any better if Rufus covers Perfect Day for me. You know what I mean? It's not going to, I'm not going to like think this song is any better. Or, you know, Leonard Cohen's another one that comes to mind. Like, the lyrical content is so valuable. It supersedes anything else. The overall artistry is the reason I'm interviewing you, and is the reason that you're here, and is the reason I wanted to expose you to my audience. Tell me the name of your new record, and it's also available on your website?
Okay, so the full record that last came out 2 years ago. It was called Hindi Man Blues.
Right.
It's not available right now. There's a long story behind it, but hopefully before the end of the year, it will be available again. That said, I have and it's been a good year for me. I struck a record deal with Sony Music in India, and they're going to release about half a dozen of my singles. So if anybody really wants to keep track of what's coming up with me, what's new, it will be pretty much all digital, mostly on YouTube and Spotify, and they can just search for me and stream and watch that stuff as it comes out every couple of months.
Wait. I'm so excited. You sent me the download when you first got it. It's an incredible record. It's a beautiful answer to your last record. You know, I have the physical CD, but I follow everything you do with as much reverence as any artist on the scene. I think you're the most, one of the most truest, sincere guys out there that's presenting an artistic vision that is 100% your own. I sincerely hope everybody that follows me on my YouTube channel here, I'm trusting that some of you who are watching now follow me, not because I'm a harmonica player, but because I have something to say. You know, whatever that is, it's something that, right or wrong, it's something that I've experienced. I'm hoping that they find that same experience in everything that you've done, Aki, because I've noticed. I think it's a crime, an absolute crime, and I don't mind saying it, that you haven't been acknowledged by the Blues Music Awards for your contribution to this music. I think it's a crime that you're not a touring artist. I have never seen anybody in my entire life work a pickup band as well as you. I have never been more I have never, ever ever in my life. I've followed amazing artists. I followed Sean Costello. I followed Anna Popovic before she was big. I followed people that I didn't want to come on afterwards. But I have never in my life been more intimidated than going on after I watched you. I'm not kidding. You are so much fun. Okay, your connection with the audience is so incredible and so refined. Your ability to take a band from anywhere in the world, from any musical background, and get them to do as best as they can do to make the music that you want to make is unparalleled. I suspect that all of the painful hours of running jams, of you know, dealing with these personalities and these egos and these different musical abilities and different visions of music, it has led to some incredible place where, like, a couple of guys that come to mind that are also good at this, is RJ Michaud, right? That's one of them right there. Like RJ's ability to get a band and get them and whip them into shape and to do this. When I travel, it's so hard for me, and so I have to go to Argentina this year. I have to go to Mexico this year. I have to work with pickup bands. There's cultural differences. There's cultural barriers. There's lack of listening. There's people that have listened to traditional blues in Argentina in the band I'll be playing with more than I have. They know it better. They don't know how to abandon that. They don't know how to say it's fuck this. Like, there's all kinds of hurdles. I've never seen anybody take a band and do it as well as you. And you have so much fun. Like maybe you weren't having fun, but it didn't look like that. You owned the Harmonica Hill Country thing. I sat in my car. My wife was sitting next to me, Caitlin, and we're watching you do the show, and I'm just like absolutely dumbfounded. I have never ever heard in the musical concepts. They're difficult. That I think you had extra measures of one. You had extra you had extra bars in there. You were able to get that across. The band was intoxicated. They were, yeah. It was incredible. It was incredible, Aki.
Well, Jason, look, music making is like, this better than anybody else. It's like having a conversation or a group conversation. And nobody can have a conversation with another person if they're not accommodating at all times. Like even in this conversation, I speak, I say something, hopefully you're listening, then you say something, hopefully I'm listening. Then we take the context of that. We understand how we speak. We understand our kind of like what wave everybody's on, what wavelength everyone's on, the tempo of speech. I know you're not going to just suddenly just have some kind of crazy attack and say something completely outrageous right now. I have a feeling you may, and you kind of have a feeling that I might not. So this is the same with music, and I think for me personally, coming up in India, one of the good things was that India, many people don't realize this, it's really like Europe in many ways, in that it's a lot of ethnicities and old cultures and languages and tribes in conflict and in harmony. And once you grow up in that kind of environment, you kind of, even if it's a simple act of traveling in a train in Bombay during rush hour, you cannot get through that journey if you're not accommodating. And for me, just coming through the jam culture, blues jam culture, people often still laugh at me or snicker that I still do it. It is a constant learning process musically and from a psychological or a personality kind of perspective, just learning how to be around people. And I really hope anybody that's playing blues, especially, or jazz, which are some of the true forms of music left, which are live and collaborative and improvisational, I hope they kind of appreciate the jam culture around it, because that's really what I did. I mean, the hill country, and I'm so happy that you liked it, because I was terrified. Not because the band wasn't great. They were great guys, great players. I just hadn't played with them.
Yeah.
So, um, but I was jamming essentially, and the whole first two songs I spent gauging them, and they were gauging me.
Yeah.
So once you kind of do that, you kind of know then, oh, is there a next gear? And if I go into that next gear, is it going to lead to success or just tragic failure? So that's really all there is to it.
Wow, I love you so much. And you're so good at accommodating. And man, I have so much to learn from what you just said. And yeah, you're incredible. Thank you so much for doing this. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks,
Wow.
Jason.
Wow. I've so enjoyed every moment of this. Aki, I can never thank you enough. I hate editing videos. I'm going to get right on it. I'm going to get right on it and get this thing.
Jason,
If I
look, let me just say this
today, I'll
and
be.
I want your audience to listen, because I meant what I said. I've stopped you from a long many. You probably only remember the first couple of gigs I was there. Dave Barrett sent me your way, and he said, check this guy out. He's doing something totally out there, totally different, and he knows what he's doing. And I remember first coming to your first show, listening to your sound check, which was you playing, just testing your amp out. And I came up to you and I said, well, what chromatic harmonica are you playing? And you were like, I don't play chromatic, or something like that, which was the first egg in my face, because I realized, oh my God, this guy is like so many levels ahead that, it almost, I don't even understand what he's doing. And then the next two gigs, I ran back to Dave and I said, I don't even know what position he's playing. I don't even know what's going on. And Dave was like, just listen to what's going on. So I've been watching, following, worshiping what you do for a long time. And you're like, everything you said was so kind, but really it should be the other way around. You are one of the truest original artists around, and at many levels. And you've also represented so many aspects of your humanity in your music, through your music. And I know you've received a lot of flack over the years for being true to yourself in many ways, musical and not. And so from me, just utter respect, and I'm so happy that you like anything that I do. Thank you for interviewing me.
It's going to be a tough one to top. Thank you, Aki. I really appreciate it, and thanks for the kind words.